G'day guys, I just got home and I've got a little something I want to share with you guys. Check this out. Don't know if you can see that in the container. I'll get him out for you guys. Pretty much, he's sleeping. Yeah, I got a red-eyed tree frog. So I'm going to get him out and show you guys what he looks like. Now have a look at that, guys. That is the Australian red-eyed tree frog. Isn't it an absolutely beautiful frog? As you can see, it's a lot more petite than my green tree frog. It's a lot slimmer, a little bit smaller, and a lot more active. Not as inclined to being handled as my green tree. I even noticed I did have a bit of... As you can see right there, they do jump quite a lot in comparison to green trees. I'm just going to grab this guy, 1 second. So yeah, the red-eyed tree frogs, they don't really like, they don't really tolerate handling as well as the green trees do. Being a much slimmer frog, they're much more agile. They can jump much higher and much faster. As you can see, he's even right now just looking for somewhere to jump to. So if maybe I put my hand out, he might jump on it. No, he's not even looking there. But as you can see, they have absolutely beautiful colours, like this bright green, a bright yellow belly, and they got red eyes, which I really like. Whoop! He's off again. We'll be back. Alright, so I'm not going to keep him out much longer because he really doesn't like being handled. He's jumping quite a lot. I'm just worried he's going to jump somewhere he probably shouldn't go and I can't get to him, or he gets hurt or something. But as you can see, very beautiful frog, very slender build, much longer legs, built for jumping. And he's going in the terrarium with my green tree because, believe it or not, you can mix red-eyed tree frogs and green tree frogs. Provided they're roughly the same size, they get along fine. Alright, I'm going to pop him back and I will be back.
A few moments later.
Alright, I'm back. So I had to put the frog in its terrarium because it just did not like being handled. It was jumping around way too much and I just didn't want it getting injured or anything like that. So it's in the terrarium. But yeah, as you saw, very different from the green tree frog I had. Much more slender build, different colour patterns on it, like a much brighter green, a slightly orangey yellow belly, much longer legs, and of course the bright red eyes, which gives them their name, red-eyed tree frog. Now a lot of you are probably thinking out there, that's not a red-eyed tree frog, this is a red-eyed tree frog. You are correct, but you're wrong as well. There's two types of red-eyed tree frogs. The one that I've got here, I'll put a picture here, that's the Australian red-eyed tree frog. Kind of just looks like a green tree frog unless you look closely and you can see some subtle differences that give it away as a red-eyed tree frog. Most people that hear the word red-eyed tree frog do think of this though. This is not an Australian red-eyed tree frog. It is a red-eyed tree frog. It's the more commonly known red-eyed tree frog because it's the one you see on TV more because it is much more colourful. But it is not an Australian red-eyed tree frog. So that particular red-eyed tree frog, this one here, it's native to Central America, Mexico and Colombia. Where this one here, which what I just showed you guys me holding, that one I bought today, that particular one is native to Australia. It is specifically native to Eastern Australia, ranging from north of Sydney all the way up to northern Queensland. So, well, mid-north Queensland, not all the way up, it's a bit too hot there. But they're both rainforest frogs, they both live in the trees, they both have a very similar behaviour. It's just one is native to mid-north Queensland and Eastern Australia, while the other is native to Mexico, Colombia and Central America, both of which of course are very beautiful, but of course the one native to Mexico, Colombia, they're much more colourful and pretty and more well known as a red-eyed tree frog. Most people see this particular species of red-eyed tree frog and just assume it's a green tree frog, but it's actually a red-eye. So there you go. For those who don't know, now you know. There is also a few different differences in behaviour between this red-eyed tree frog I've got and the green tree frog I got a couple of weeks ago. They're living together in a terrarium, which is fine. They're roughly the same size. My green's like slightly bigger in terms of it's just a bulkier built frog, but they're roughly the same size, so they'll get along fine. But the differences in behaviour are the green tree frog I got, being a heavier set frog, it likes to sit on more flat surfaces, so it'll sit on the ledges and on the branches and stuff like that, where the red-eye will sit there as well, but because it's a much lighter frog, it's a much thinner frame, its actual suction pads on the end of its toes and fingers are a bit bigger than the green tree frogs as well, so it has better suction and it's a lighter weight frog. It actually likes to sit on vertical surfaces, probably more so than on flat. So it'll spend a lot of the time on the glass, where the green tree frog I haven't once seen it on the glass. It's capable of hanging onto the glass, but it's probably not that comfortable. It'll eventually slide off. It can hang onto the glass and climb up glass, but it doesn't really sit like that. It eventually slides off. Where the red eye, being a much lighter frame, can actually like sit on the front glass and go to sleep like that effortlessly. So yeah, the red eye is usually almost always on the glass, and my green is usually sitting in the plant or on the rock ledge or on the branch or something like that. So yeah, they don't even really get in each other's way much because they accommodate different areas of the terrarium most of the time. But being a frog, they're not really a territorial animal. Frogs are usually pretty okay being around other frogs. So they're both a type of green tree frog species, and they're both about the same size. They're fine to go together in a terrarium if you want to do so. Alright guys, so now for the next segment of this video. Half this video is just me just showing you the new frog I got and doing a little brief description on them and how they're different from the overseas variety that most people know of as the red-eyed green tree frog. So this next part of my video is dedicated to people who are first setting up and not sure of all the equipment they may or may not be needing for keeping a reptile of one sort or another. So I'm just going to list 12 of the main pieces of equipment you're going to need when keeping reptiles. Also, bearing in mind, you may not need all 12 of these pieces of equipment. Some of them are more specific to certain categories of reptile than others, so depending on what you're keeping, you might not need all of these things. But I'm going to list them anyway, just in case. And as you can see, I'm joined by my black-headed python, so yeah, it's going to be fun. Alright, first thing. If you're going to keep a snake, get yourself a snake hook. Now, a lot of you are thinking, why? I'm only getting a python, they're not venomous. True, and look, if you're happy to get bitten, that's fine. But that's just the fact of keeping snakes. You get bitten sometimes. I mean, it's going to happen. Mind you, it's not as bad as people make it out to be. Getting bitten by a snake is not that painful, it's not that bad. But, you know, it happens. Usually, unless your snake is naturally snappy and a defensive sort of a snake, like say a jungle jag or a jungle carpet or a coastal carpet hatchling, they're naturally snappy, and you take little nips here and there which aren't that bad, they're just nips. The main snake bite that's a little worse is a feeding bite. Now that is when you're feeding your snake, or the snake thinks it's getting food, when in actual fact all you're doing is reaching in the tank to change its water or move it or clean or something. And it thinks it's getting fed and it gets excited and it grabs a hold of your hand and thinks it's food, doesn't want to let go. And yeah, a little more painful because it decides to hang on. So that's why a snake hook's handy, just for the fact that you can use this tool to let the snake know it's not being fed, and it can calm the hell down before you put your hand in. Because, like, as an example, my rosette diamond python is the worst for this. Every time I go to open the tank, even if I just walk in front of the tank, it's ready to bite. Not because it's an aggressive snake, it's perfectly calm with handling, it just loves food. And the snake hook is what I use to let it know it's not getting fed before I put my hand in. I'll open the tank up, it's already got its neck in the S shape, ready to strike at the first thing that it appears, which is going to be my hand, but it thinks it's going to be food. I use this to... Excuse me. What are you doing? Yeah, I use this to kind of, I know it sounds kind of silly, but I boop his snoot with the snake hook. I will boop him on the head softly, or I will use the hook to kind of move his head away from looking at my hand or whatever he's about to think of biting. Throwing his little S-shaped coil that he's got, I'll throw it off by using this to un-S-shape his neck. And I'll kind of move him around with the hook, and when I do this, he knows, oh, I'm not getting fed, because this doesn't happen to me when food normally comes. He calms down, loses the S shape in his neck, stops thinking he's getting fed, I can then put my hand in. But look, feeding aside, if you're keeping something a little more snappy like jungle carpet, or just a snake that just doesn't like you being near it or touching it at all, and you have to move it to clean its tank, and you have to move it from the tank into a tub or something or whatever, the hook's good because it helps you get it up out of the tank. Usually with my snappy snakes, once I've got them out of the tank and I've got them up and moving, I can handle them free-handed, no problem, they don't bite. It's just those first couple of seconds when you have to reach into their tank and they're in a defensive posture, you're not going to be able to touch them without getting bitten. So you get them with the hook, lift them up, then you use your hands. And it's all good. So snake hook, very important. Alright, now next item on my list, I got my monitor now. Next item on my list is not what you'd think would be on a Reptile list for like equipment. It's actually a sift. This is just a normal metal kitchen sift that you use for, you know, washing vegetables or straining pasta or whatever. This helps with enclosures if you've got enclosures with sand in them. So like my Ridgie here, which just jumped, and I'll be grab him now. Someone's in a bit of an active mood today. Yeah, if you've got an enclosure with sand in it, with lizards like ridge-tail monitor for example, or bearded dragons or whatever, you got desert sand or white sand or whatever, they're going to ruin that sand. They're going to be pooing in it and weeing in it. There's going to be flaked bits of shed skin mixed through the sand. The thing is, you don't want to throw away all your sand every time the lizard makes one little mess on it. So you use a kitchen sift. Obviously you don't put it back in the kitchen, but you sift the sand to get all the bits of crap out of it so you can reuse it a few times before you have to throw it away. So these are very handy for keeping your sand clean. Alright, so now I'm with the blue tongue. I'm slowly going through one animal, then the next animal, just try and find one that I can actually sit here and film with, and it's not going to try and get away from me, because it's making it kind of difficult. Alright, so I think blue tongue's a good bet for now, because he's just going to chill. Anyway, next item of things on my list are feeding tongs. Now they can vary depending on what you're keeping. So for example, you can have little tiny like plastic tongs like this big, or little metal ones that are very small. If you're keeping smaller reptiles, like for example with my green tree frogs, I will be using smaller tongs like this. For their feeding, I'll be feeding them crickets with the tongs. Where if I have something bigger, like my snakes, maybe my hatchlings to sub-adults, I'll be using these medium-sized tongs. Where with my bigger snakes, like my big coastal carpet, he's almost 10 foot long, I will be using jumbo tongs, like this. Or you can also get these like scissor style ones, which are quite nice as well. They're a decent size, very durable. So your tongs vary from what you're keeping. Most reptiles do need tong feeding at some point or another. Snakes almost always do. Frogs, it's up to you. You can just throw the crickets in, or you can tong feed them. I prefer to tong feed them, that way I know everything gets eaten. I don't want crickets running around, getting out of the enclosure and running around my room. Or I don't want them falling in the water and drowning and polluting the water, so I'd rather tong feed the crickets. I usually will tong feed my monitor, a pinky mouse, just because I don't really want to use my fingers, because he's missed the mouse and bitten me a few times in the past, so I'd rather just be safe with that. Same as feeding crickets to my bearded dragon and blue tongues. I don't like just throwing them in the enclosure, because half of them get lost in the enclosure and never get found. So yeah, tongs are another must for almost any reptile. Alright, blue tongue's back. I got the bearded dragon because the blue tongue didn't like being handled either. I'm just not having much luck with my animals today, am I? You're going to behave though. He's always good. Alright. So this next thing on my list, I guess it's not really something you have to have. I just personally like it, and I've become kind of obsessed with using them because they're actually really good. Jurassic wipes. They don't have to specifically be Jurassic wipes. There's different types of reptile wipes. They all kind of work very much the same. But I've become kind of obsessed with these. Mainly with snake tubs, because a snake tub is very easy to clean out. It's just a plastic tub, so I like to wipe it down with this before I replace the paper in it when I clean them out. It just leaves the tub smelling nice and fresh. It does sterilize it and kill any germs and stuff like that. So yeah, and because it's got I think lime or lemon juice or something in it, or yeah, something like that. It's got some sort of citrus-based substance in it which helps lift off stains and any dried up crap that's stuck to the plastic. You can use it to clean your terrariums with as well. However, I wouldn't use this to wipe your glass on your terrariums, because it does kind of leave a film which makes your glass look a little bit cloudy. So I would just use water for that, but for actual just general cleaning of like the bottom of your enclosure or a snake tub or whatever, these are really great. Again, not necessary. I've just found it makes cleaning a lot quicker and easier. For me especially, because I keep a lot of stuff. So again, this isn't an essential thing, but it's just handy to have it on hand. Repti Mist. Now there's different brands of this stuff, they all very much do the same thing. This is basically for stuck shed. If you've got a reptile with stuck shed, whether that's a python or a lizard or whatever, it's got stuck shed that's dried up and it's just not coming off, you can spray them with this. It helps moisturize the stuck shed so it comes off. Again, the reason I say it's not necessary to have all the time is because generally if you're keeping a reptile properly with the proper humidity and heat requirements and it has water to bathe in, it shouldn't get stuck shed. But in the off chance that it does have stuck shed, this stuff's kind of handy to have. It helps get that stuck shed off a little quicker than if you didn't have it. There are also other things you can do, like soaking your reptile and again, adjusting your humidity a bit. But I mean, this alongside all that, it helps as well. So another thing I like to have on hand, again, most people probably won't need this if they're keeping things properly. I personally have some just because of the fact that I don't like letting things get bad. I'd rather have treatment on hand for things that could pop up rather than have to wait until I can get a hold of something to fix something that's already happened. I'd rather just fix it straight away. So this is mite spray. Now you can get different brands of mite spray. This is just a Reptile mite spray. So yeah, but there's many different brands. They all kind of work the same. You follow the directions on the bottle depending on what one you've got, because some are more concentrated than others, some have different application methods than others. This one, you simply just spray down the enclosure, and you can spray the reptile as well, provided you cover their face, because you don't want it on their face. But I like to have these on hand just because snake mites, well, they're not the most common thing if you're keeping your reptiles clean and you're not bringing in regular animals all the time that can potentially introduce them. Generally, you almost never get them, but if you do, I've had them once, they're a nightmare to get rid of. So having this on hand and catching it early makes it so much easier than having to wait a day or two until you can get to the shops to buy this, and by then the mites have doubled in their numbers and it's even harder to get rid of them. So yeah, mite spray. So these two items are if you're going to be keeping lizards: Reptile and Reptivite. So these are vitamin and calcium powders you will be mixing into your lizard's food. So I usually like to alternate between these. Like I'll give my, say for example, I'll give the bearded dragon like various fruits and veg, and occasionally a bit of meat, but very rare. Not so much red meat that we eat, but like my blue tongues especially, they love canned dog food. Most blue tongue breeders will feed them primarily canned dog food or dry dog food. Bearded dragon will eat it too because he's in the same enclosure with them. But the bearded dragon primarily gets mostly veg and fruit. So when I give him fruit, because fruit's just much more absorbent than vegetables, I will dust some calcium powder or I will dust a little bit of vitamin powder on his food. Mix it through so it absorbs into the fruit and feed it to him. So very important. This way they get all their essential vitamins and obviously calcium for their bones. So yeah. And while we're on the subject of calcium, lighting is a very important thing, specifically UV lighting. Now if you're, for example, giving your, let's say, bearded dragon calcium powder, but you don't have a UV light, this won't do anything. See, they use the vitamin D from the UV light to help metabolize calcium. So without UV, they can't absorb this. So UV lights can come in a couple of different options. There are the fluorescent tube variety, which is a picture right there, because I'm not going to take a tube off my tank just to show you guys. Too much effort, sorry. Or there's the bulb variety, which I'll show you here as well, because again, effort, come on guys. I'm not pulling down my displays just for this. So yeah, you want to have a UV bulb for your reptile. Depending on what you're keeping will depend on the spectrum of UV bulb. You can have anywhere from like a 5.0 to a 10.0 UV bulb for most lizards. Turtles, 10.0. Lower wattage, sorry, not low wattage, spectrum, lower spectrum like 2.0. Most lizards and turtles you can't do that with, it's just way too low. They're for more reptiles that don't require much UV, like certain species of gecko and frogs that are like semi-nocturnal, semi-diurnal. They sometimes come out in the day, but they're mostly nocturnal, but because they still sometimes come out in the daytime, they still need some UV. So you have a 2.0 for them. But that's not a common thing in the hobby. So again, while we're on the topic of lighting, your lights need to be on a certain time frame per day. Your reptiles do need the day and night cycle. So for UV, you'd want it on for about 8 hours a day. Same with heat lamps, which before I get into this topic, let's just brought the next one up. Heating. So heating is very important for all reptiles because they're cold-blooded. They can't regulate their own body temperature. They need to thermoregulate with an external source. Usually it's the sun or rocks that have warmed up from being in the sun. They sit on the rock and bask and warm up. So in captivity they can't really do that naturally. so we have to give them heat ourselves. Now this can come in a couple of varieties. You can have heat lamps, ceramic heat lamps. I guess they're not really lamps, are they? They're just ceramic thingies that produce heat, or heat mats. This varies on what you're keeping. They all have their own preferences. Some animals like to get up high and bask, so if that you have a lamp or a ceramic disc or whatever they're called. For things that are more ground dwellers, like say blue-tongue skinks, or a lot of pythons, you can do this with, because it's just more convenient for pythons, because especially if you're keeping pythons in rack systems, you can't really have heat lamps in that. So heat mats for those. So yeah, they're kind of things you can use for heat. And you can also use heat cables, which I'll put a picture here. So heat cables, you can wrap them around things and the Reptile sits on that. Or like what I've done with my rack system, I've got a heat cable running through the whole back of my whole rack system. So that works too. So the product I was about to talk about before I started talking about the heating, which is another product on my list anyway, this particular product goes hand in hand with your heating and your UV. So, because as I was saying, they need a day and night cycle for their UV or their light in general. They need the heat lamps to be on just during the daytime usually. Heat mats and heat cables, usually you have them on constantly, but you plug them into a thermostat. So, different thing, we're not going to go into thermostats, but a thermostat is something to consider as well if you're doing something like that, but we're not going to go too into that one. But what I'm going to talk about is these light timers. So you get these from your local hardware store, and this is what you use for your UV and your heat lamps. Well, sorry, actually no, you can use your heat lamps and your pretty much all your heating stuff. You want to probably put it on a thermostat, and just your UV, you have it on the light timer for 8 hours a day. I mean, you can turn it on and off yourself every day, but it's a little inconsistent, and if you're keeping a lot of animals, it gets even harder. So I'd really advise getting some timers. Very cheap, they're only like $10, $20 usually, so you can pick them up in any convenience store or hardware store or wherever. So the last thing on my list is a water bowl, but not just any water bowl. Either the ceramic water bowls or the metal water bowls. I only use these, like really only use the ceramic ones. The metal ones are great too. They both serve the same purpose, other than obviously holding water, but they're smooth, they can't be scratched, so they can't hold bad bacteria in them. I hate plastic water bowls, and I hate fake rock looking ones, because they have lots of crevices in the fake rock ones and cracks and stuff to make them look realistic, and the plastic ones can be scratched ridiculously easy. Those scratches, crevices, can build up lots of nasty bacteria in there, because you know you got water in there and bacteria is going to grow in the water. You're going to get slime on your inside of your bowl, which normally when you change your water bowl, you give it a wipe and a clean, it wipes all the slime and all that bad bacteria off. You got little crevices and cracks, you can't clean in that. So it's just not really that sanitary long term. Where, you know, a metal bowl, I mean, yes, metal bowls can be scratched, but you've got to scratch it pretty damn hard with something else that's made of metal. Your Reptile isn't going to be able to do that. The ceramic ones, you can't really scratch them unless you really try to, and again, it's something your Reptile can't do. So these, you can wipe them down and get them 100% clean every time. That's why I love these, and I prefer, they're both great, and with that particular factor, they're both great, but I always use the ceramic over the metal just because it's got more weight to it. So that's quite light. You know, I mean, some reptiles are strong enough to tip that over or move it around. This is a lot heavier. If I'm using this for a reptile that's an adequate size for whatever reptile, like this is only a small size bowl, so I'd be using it with a small size reptile. It wouldn't be able to move this around or tip it over or anything like that, so that's why I prefer ceramic over metal. But as far as just hygiene goes, they're both great. Well, that was basically it, guys. Hope my video was helpful for anyone starting up with reptiles and they're not sure what equipment they might or might not need. As always, guys, you know the drill. Leave us a like, give us a subscribe if you're not subscribed yet, because I upload weekly, or at least I try to. So yeah, give us a sub if you want. Instagram and Twitter's down below if you want to follow me there. I always post updates on what I'm doing and upcoming videos and whatnot. So I hope to see you there as well as on my YouTube. I'll also leave this video at that. I'm going to do some more updates on the red-eyed tree frog. Once he settles in a little better, I might go into more detail about them like I did with the green tree frog. And I want to do some videos of them eating as well. I haven't really filmed them eat. I'm just lazy. I feed them and I can't be bothered setting up the camera. So I will do a feeding video after they've settled. See you guys in the next one. Bye bye.
Don't make me tell